Welcome back. This is Daybreak. Lovely to have you here on the broadcast, and thank you for staying with us. We'll sample your feedback in the course of this broadcast this morning here on Daybreak, and the hashtag on X is Citizen Daybreak. The SMS code, as ever, is 22422 at Citizen TV Kenya and at Ayub Abdikadir. On my immediate right is Buka Omole. He is the National Vice Chairperson of the Communist Party of Kenya. Good morning, Buka. Lovely having you here. On the front line during the process yesterday?
Of course, yes. It's important to say that what the young people are actually demonstrating in the street calls for even older generation to join them. And the majority of the Kenyan people now are going in the street even with their children. But to open this debate...
Okay, we'll continue with the debate. Josephine Wanjiru is youth and gender advocate. Good morning, Josephine.
Good morning.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Lovely having you here. And also Wangai Wange, the leadership and governance consultant, who informed me that they had never had enough sleep to show up for this show on the broadcast. Thank you for your time.
Thank you,
Much appreciated. Lovely having you here on the broadcast. Yes, Buka, you are proceeding with the point then. And how effective would this be? Because on many fronts, a lot has been deployed in terms of seeking proper governance, good leadership, which largely comes from a democratic process. But also what has transpired, yes, it's an exercise of a constitutional right. But what's the end game? What will it yield in the end?
First of all, it's important to note that the people fighting in the street are not fighting to support some ideas in their head. These people have been confronted. It's like they are locked in a room of starvation. They are fighting a fight of life and death. They are fighting to save their dignity. They are fighting to protect themselves from dying. So they are not just saying that we want to go to the street. Nobody wants to go to the street. People want to live a happy life in Kenya. But now some people have forced you. It's like you are locked into a room. There's no food. There's no oxygen. You have to break it and move forward. But three most important points. First of all, we have to pass really our heartfelt condolences to Rex Masai, who was murdered by the Kenya police yesterday. This is important because the protest yesterday were highly a peaceful protest. But after 6 o'clock, the government deployed thugs in the street that shot at the youths, murdered and injured a few people to create and manufacture fear of consent. But what the government must know, that even if they want to manufacture fear of consent, people are already dying at home. So they will prefer to die in the street fighting than to expect them to stay at home. The second thing is the legality of the process. President William Samoei Ruto has violated every other right to dominate us as our president, every person that voted him. What the young people are saying, that you lied to us. And now it is not the time to put more lies. We just want you to solve the crisis in this country through practical issues. And we are not saying that you go, for example, and do some window dressing in terms of trying to bring out that I want to say that if the housing levy was illegal the other time, I want to remove it. Or I want to say that I want to cut the 16 budget cuts. What people are asking for is not a theoretical solution. They want president to roll out a process that will absorb the majority of the Kenyan people into employment, and that is industrialization. There is no plan in the budget to roll out a deliberate industrialization process to absorb the young people that are unemployed. In fact, these demonstrations have even augmented. They are not just talking about this finance bill. Now we are saying Ruto must go because he has crossed the red line. We are going to demand that the IMF draft bill be pushed back because it is not a product of the people. So what the Kenyan people are saying, that do not debate a product that is being imposed upon the Kenyan people. But we want to start a process that will have a consent of budget for the majority of the people that can actually be determined, but not to reclaim our sovereignty to some foreign powers.
Okay,
and finally,
you make the final point, and because I want also us to be practical about the essence of what this will generate in the end. And when you say he must go, there are only two ways. And we gave unto ourselves a very liberal, one of the most admired, eloquent, and transparent constitution, where we have predictable electoral timetable, where we go to the elections after every 5 years. The problem is that you young Kenyans don't vote or do not register as voters. When you say he must go, you have to either petition Parliament or an impeachment process is starts at the floor of the National Assembly, because it has that powers given to it by the Constitution. How then can you explore these two options besides saying verbally that he must go, to be practical, as you have mentioned in your first submission?
First of all, what puts President Ruto into State House is that he affirms to the Kenyan people that he will observe fidelity to the Kenyan Constitution. If the President Ruto violates the Constitution, he has no mandate, he has no jurisdiction to be our president. And the Article 1 of the Constitution absolutely mentions that all power is in the people of Kenya. They can exercise it directly through themselves or indirectly through the leaders that they have elected to represent them. That means the only way for the young people in the street, if the President Ruto violates the Constitution, whoever calls the law must live by that law. There is nowhere in the Constitution that is indicated that IMF and World Bank can impose a draft on us for discussion. In fact, the Constitution narrates itself and pronounces itself that all discussions and public participation must be from below. And it actually resonates with the President's message when he was campaigning, the bottom-up approach.
Okay.
Now, this practicality we are talking about, that the President has a choice. He can choose to stick by the Constitution and extend his term, or be overthrown by the anger of the people, because all power belongs to the people of Kenya, without restricting ourselves to a boat crowd in Parliament that to petition the same president. 205 legislators.
Thank you. We'll talk more about that. And the change that we all desire comes at the ballot, to be clear, because we have a very laid out, beautiful procedure of the electoral process where Kenyans will go to the ballot, and we know when they will go to the ballot, and we have institutions that oversee that process. Josephine, coming to you, what profound effect would this protest by Gen Zs have on Kenya's governance landscape? And do you think it can do a course correction of the very evident missteps by those in leadership positions? And at most times, where all this revolves, and which is Parliament, where parliamentarians have largely failed the Kenyan people in advocating for public interest issues.
First of all, thank you for having me. And second of all, I'd like to state, as a matter of factly, for myself, I am a Gen Z. I am part of the Gen Z movement. But the trajectory the Gen Z movement has taken up to now, as of yesterday, is one that I do not support. Now, first, to go to your questions as I expound on my statement. So you're asking if what is happening, the protests, will have an impact on our legislature and our lawmaking process. That has answered itself. Whatever happened on Tuesday in the protests, which were largely peaceful, have already impacted even the finance bill itself. The Finance and Planning Committee went in Nakuru over the weekend and made parliamentary changes to the bill and came out with it on Tuesday, because Monday was a public holiday, came out with it on Tuesday and told us that we have listened to you in accordance with Article 118 and Article 196 of the Constitution, which mandates public participation. What we are doing right now is constitutionally correct. This is what the Constitution of 2010 was envisioning for the country when they made people be able to participate, and not just locally. Public participation is international, which means that even governance experts in Germany, US, are able to participate once the budget policy statement and other bills, not just the financial bill, are rolled out. The effect of this right now, that we have, the kind of participation it is, we have already seen the good effects that happened, which is up for debate. I know my people, my gentleman over here on my right and left, will have a say on whether the changes to the bill were lawful or were good or whatever. In my opinion, the changes to the bill were adequate, and they bore good fruits. Right now, what the Gen Zs are doing is saying reject wholly. Let's go to the bill-making process. These things come from the National Treasury before they even go to the Parliament. National Treasury has experts, people who have done finance for the longest time, all the way in budget, even budget appropriation and budget formulation. Started in November, budget policy statement in February. That's when it was released. And from February, this has been amended and debated up to now. For us to say, to reject the whole bill now, when the financial year starts 1st of July, we have 10 days to come up with something, have it approved, have it amended, and then have it implemented by 1st of July. That is a far stretch. What we can have right now is we have the third reading that has amendments to the bill. Let us talk to our MPs. You have told us what you have changed. Can you ask us what you want you to change? We do not want you to change the eco-levy on sanitary towels. Okay. Instead, why don't you impact an eco-levy on other plastics that are being manufactured and whatnot? Now, what we need to do is sit down reasonably and tell them what we want. Let me give you a short scenario for context, because you're talking to the young people, and some of these terms may be jargon. When I was in high school, that's when Dr. Matiang'i came into the parliament as the cabinet secretary for education. I was in Form 3. That was in 2016. When he came in, he said, "You know what? My high school, we're paying a whopping 100,000 per year for a national school that has so many people from all diverse backgrounds come to the school. That was unfair." Dr. Matiang'i said, "You know what? I'm cutting all school fees across all high schools to 53,000 per year," which was commendable. Now, our headmistress came to us. I'd applaud her so many times. She's called Mrs. Kainga, and I give you a shout out. She decided, you know what, 99,000, 50,000 is a lot, and I understand the reason. But let me go to my students. She called us all to the school hall and told us, we're having a budget cut. And you know what that means? It means that now you not enjoy life as usual. Can you tell me what you want to cut according to you're living here and whatnot? I will tell you what I propose, and you tell me. And we had just a 1-hour discussion. Everything was okay. We said we used to take coffee in the morning. We said you can take porridge. It's easier. We used to have smokies and eggs every Sunday. We told them you can have a smoky every other Sunday. We used to have milk tea at 4 p.m. We told them you don't need the milk tea at 4 p.m. You can cut that. You can imagine those recurrent expenditures, what impact it had, and the peace it had between the people. That's what
you were consulted.
You were consulted. And that's what we need to do. And it is actually in the Constitution to consult the public. And we are exercising our right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, Wangede, are the changes announced by the Finance and National Planning Committee Chairperson, Kuria Kimani, enough to satisfy the reasons as to why the demonstrators are on the streets, and why the sudden change in the position of the Gen Zs who are demonstrating from not the amendments that they have heard, but now calling for a total rejection?
Thank you, Ayub. First, I would like to send my commiserations as well to the gentleman that we lost yesterday in the protests. That was quite unfortunate, unnecessary, uncalled for. Violence should never, at any one point, be meted on demonstrators who are demonstrating peaceably. Article 37 of the Constitution is very clear about demonstrations. So we can never have a negotiation around violence on protesters. To your question, it's good progress, because finance bill previously, before the amendment, was quite punitive. And what we think, for the record again, I'm not a Gen Z, I'm a millennial. And what this generation is asking for is, can we be conscious about the conversation around frugality and accountability around the leadership that we have that goes beyond the finance bill? So the conversation with the generation right now, I'm calling it the woke generation, not Gen Z, as many people are doing, because it spans from anyone who is below 40 years. And what we are asking is, can we have a conversation around accountability beyond the finance bill. What I consider the finance bill as a silver lining is it has sparked the conversation. And now the generation is asking for a conversation that is beyond the finance bill to leadership. So when you hear my colleague talk about the demand that the president must go, they are saying, we are not satisfied with how you are governing the nation. Therefore, we are asking that you reconsider the conversation around leadership, not just the finance bill. So it's good enough that it has started the conversation around what can be cut and what can be amended, what can be changed. But there's far-reaching and more important conversations beyond the finance bill.
Booker, coming to you, are we then seeing an overflow of the calls from the demonstrators affecting and calling for further checks on institutions of governance? And how will this, in the end, better our governance model in Kenya?
First of all, the Kenyan people are proud of the 2010 Constitution because it gave them this democratic space. But they are also aware that before the 2010 Constitution came to be, so many people martyred in the Kenyan street, mainly poor people and young people. Now they are saying that it is their time to push the Kenyan struggle to the next level so that the Constitution does not remain just a document in theory, but in its practice. So they're asking the government of the day, which is led by President William Samoei Ruto, that we elected you based on the Constitution of 2010. That means you have to defend the common good of the people. But you've been employing policies that are anti-poor people. They are anti-hustler. So what we are saying is that we want to recall you. We want to say that we voted you, but you have violated the social contract we have with you. But also it's important to respond to certain issues that my colleague here, Josephine, raised, because it is important. We have been saying that the youth in this country are divided from the privileged youth and non-privileged youth. It's not a homogeneous whole. So when the youths are on the street, just like during the fight for independence, we had the home guards who sold their souls to the white monopoly that dominated us. There will also be youths at this time that in their positions of privileges, they are alienated from the reality of the difficulty that majority of the people. That is why one of the youths can come and say, I do not support the protest, because he does not live in the reality of the majority of the poor youth. So we also have to continue to advance the youth equation that the poor youth have the reality to suffer under President Ruto's administration. And the reason they are on the streets is because they have been mobilized by a particular leader. They are actually in the street to dramatize a continuous failure for President Ruto's government over the years. She's telling us, for example, that we got experts at the central bank, the policymakers that have been there for years, while we are saying from our side that the expert at the central bank have been summoned there by IMF and World Bank to actually advance the interest of foreign capital against the majority of the Kenyan people. So the total, innocence of her saying that we entrust the experts at the Treasury to deliver a good draft for us is actually to violate the freedom of the Kenyan people, that the youth people cannot think to deliver a draft based on the needs that they have in the society.
So you talked about the nature of our constitutional and the freedoms that come with it. She has the choice not to subscribe to the protesters, is it?
She has the choice. But the Constitution is not an individual thinking. It is a collective responsibility of the common good to address the important questions. For example,
but doesn't she have the freedom to say what she wants?
She has the freedom. She has the freedom to say what she wants. But we also have the freedom to give a rebuttal of a misconception of a protest in the street.
This is my point, Booker.
Yeah.
I mean, not all young people may end up subscribing to what's happening.
That's true.
And she has the freedom to say so, is it?
What we are saying, we are placing her where she belongs.
Okay,
she belongs to the minority them thinking of the minority. But the majority of the youth people that continue to suffer the joblessness, the starvation of a government that don't care, that majority is also represented in this debate. And there is also a minority that want to do a tailing error by supporting a regime that is highly corrupt, that actually has employed mostly people with criminal records, that cannot have accountability in terms of representing the people, and telling us that we limit the debate within the constitutional framework. Yes, we limit the debate within the constitutional framework, but the constitution states that the president of the day must offer some social responsibility. What are these social responsibilities? We have the right of employment and employment with dignity. What is President Ruto giving in terms of that right? We have a right to live in a decent housing with dignity. What is President Ruto rolling out other than private housing for the privileged people? So these rights that we are defending in the Constitution cannot be taken away from us because they belong to the majority of the Kenyan people. Okay. So the defense of the protest today is that every person that loves a better Kenya must stand up and call President Ruto out. You have violated the social contract, and it's your time to pack and go.
Yes, Josephine.
Let me make my comment, and I'll make my comment first to Mr. Buka, and also comment on what Wangai said before the break. So first of all, we are a country that is governed by what you, Mr. Ayub, said is a very eloquent and easy to understand constitution, one of the most admired in Africa. Most African countries are actually following a constitution. There is no constitution in Africa that, we are the first constitution in Africa that had a whole article concerning the youth, and that is Article 55 of the Constitution. And other countries are following suit. And that is factually correct. Number two, so first of all, let's just say we are a country that follows our laws. Nobody is above the law. So saying that we have to live outside our constitutional mandate, yet we go to the streets and say we have a right to picket, and you cannot, constitutionally, stop our right to picket, or you come here and tell me that I don't have a freedom of choice, is now, damned if I do, damned if I don't. Anyways, now let's go to the fact that he said that I am, a minority or what have you. I began by saying that I am a Gen Z. I support the protests. I do not support the trajectory that protests are taking. And I gave my reasons as to why the trajectory of so many R's reject finance bill might not actually work within 10 days of a budget implementation. Thirdly, let me talk about what you talked about, the IMF. So I saw a post by Just Ivy Africa, because a lot of influencers are also building the conversation around this. And I commend Just Ivy Africa for her recent post on telling us how IMF has a silent hand, and even on the Daily Nation, I think last week, how it has a silent hand in our budget, appropriations, and how we budget our money. So at the moment, we are, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, slaves, for lack of a better word, to the International Monetary Fund. They have a say in our governance, whether we like it or not. And we like comparing ourselves to, Singapore and those Asian countries. And what Just Ivy Africa said, and I quote, so how did the Asian tigers, the Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan, grow without the IMF and World Bank? So they had a conversation with the people. They were determined not to borrow from the IMF, but to invest in education, manufacturing, and entrepreneurship. So their leaders had a vision, and I highlight this: make a current sacrifice for a future reward. Okay. If we do not want IMF to have a hand in this, we have to have a current sacrifice and invest in local manufacturing, invest in our labor force, and that is investing in education of the people, and then invest in entrepreneurship. And what does that mean? Part of those things are what the now amended finance bill is saying, to enhance local manufacturers and make it difficult for international investors just to keep on importing goods. One of the ways that has impacted us is look at the IRA. IRA has made it difficult for reinsurers outside to get business without having the local reinsurers see business. You have to pass through all the local reinsurers, offer them what you call insurance policies before you take it outside. They have also limited reinsurance brokers from giving business to reinsurance brokers outside. So what has that done? Any reinsurance broker who wants business in Kenya has to set up in Kenya. And what does that do? It creates employment, it creates a moving money market flow, and all these things. You guys are economists and you understand what localization and coming to Kenya does. Thirdly,
yes, before you proceed to the third point and you respond to Wangai, you have mentioned critical points here that needs further explanation. For example, you talked about the dependency on the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF, the World Banks, first. Second, the aspect of borrowing. Third, accountability. All this, when you mention the countries, for example, you have listed, they embarked and waged a war on corruption. And they sufficiently won to the extent that there was more money which ended up in the people's pockets than tiny minority of individuals.
Which institutions? Then the IMF and the World Bank?
No, I'm coming to that point. Singapore is what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay.
So, Josephine, then, if you say that you don't support the trajectory the demonstrations are taking, then how do you seek to address the leadership problem here? Because if you talk about the debt and why we are an appendage to these Bretton Woods institutions, comes to the aspect of leadership, because our leaders borrowed.
For sure.
If you talk about the aspect of corruption, the Kenyan people are being stolen from. If you read the Auditor General's report, the control of budget. Then if we are to address the leadership misstep, and you say the demonstrations are taking not the right trajectory, what then will be your prescription for a problem?
And that was the third point I was actually going to Ayub, because I support the protest. It makes our governance and our leaders be awakened and realize, you know what, this generation that's coming does not take, well, I don't know. Yeah, we are aware. We are aware of what is happening, and it puts them on toes. And my third point was coming to accountability and transparency. In the previous regime, we had the president himself, Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, who came to your studios at Inoro, and I don't know if it was Inoro Kameme, and said 2 million is lost by the government every day. You remember?
2 billion.
It was 2 billion every day. Yeah, he said something like that. And Kenyans were just, we sat in our seats, and new generations, that time we were in high school and whatnot, and in universities. Now we are out and we are feeling the effect of, and we are acting upon it. So it's not actually even a Kenya Kwanza regime question, it's a leadership question, as you have mentioned, right? And I'm saying I'm not supporting the trajectory, and what I mean by that trajectory is total reject of the finance bill. Saying that the finance bill is punitive and has, taxes that do not make sense, that was revolutionary. That was a fight that I was so proud to be a part of. But total reject of the finance bill is not feasible, especially with 10 days to the start of the financial year. And when I get to the question of accountability, that is what Gen Zs actually want, as Mr. Wangai was saying, because what we just want is a transparent and meritocratic government. And let me just say, we have made steps towards a transparent and meritocratic government. Ask me how. Let's start with the Kitui government right now. Kitui government have uploaded a system on their government website where if you win a tender, you are supposed to put you've won this tender for 4 million to create this room. You're supposed to put your progress and how you've used your 4 million so that the people of Kitui County can see. Probably the members of Kitui County don't know, and that is something that we need to address. Tell people, you can actually see what people are doing.
That everything is done.
That everything is done. And secondly, in the finance bill is the e-procurement services, such that they're consolidating these tissues, the things that you buy every day, so that one, you don't overprice them, and then they're bought in large numbers for buyer power, so that you reduce the price of these recurrent commodities, and not just recurrent commodities. Expenditure of the parliament in broad daylight is going to be put electronically on an e-procurement service by the national government. Aren't those steps in the right direction, gentlemen?
Yes. Wangai, I'll come to you, Buka. Wangai, then, how does the Kenyan leadership respond to this? Because it's a totally different form of protesting against the government. The unpredictability, the internet connection, the education levels, the awakening, how awakened they are. Does then this mean that the government must find a different form of strategic move to attend to these young Gen Zs who are waking up and demanding for accountability, and doing so against the backdrop of them knowing how government works and not walking in the dark and more or less giving information that they are not sure about, but saying and understanding the processes of governance. And how do you think then the response from the government should be in addressing their needs?
Two things. One, there's a famous quote that says, it's actually a scripture that says that, "Woe unto you, nation, if your king is a child." and your princes feast in the morning. Now, I will add something to that. Woe unto you, nation, if your president is a tourist and your princes feast in the morning. The point I'm making is, I am truly concerned that the leadership we have is not alive to the issues that are affecting Kenyans on a real-time basis, because we are seriously on a tourism adventure, which is, in my opinion, unjustifiable, because COVID taught us something, that you can actually speak to someone who is in whatever part of the world and get business and the job done without necessarily physical meeting. So it's a concern that the leadership is not aware of the prevailing circumstances that we're in. So, to answer your question, when I go to my second point, how does the leadership respond? One, let's have a moral consciousness. In the sense of we have put everybody who is in a leadership position because we expect them to lead. What we have is leaders by title, not by action. And so when we speak about the conversation around accountability, we are saying the generation will support you if you lead. And by leading means leading by example. If it's conversations around austerity measures, can we see the leadership take leadership as far as that is concerned? How do you justify 200 million shillings in the budget to buy new vehicles when we are talking about people who have no homes, when we are talking about people who are dying out of hunger? So how does the government respond? One, ensure that we do the right thing. Number two, there has to be, we have to re-engineer our civic education to respond, or rather to teach and educate our young people on how government works. We have to do that because if the 75% of our population right now is made up of youth.
Yeah.
And like you said, the Constitution has already outlined the democratic process of getting people in power. So we have to get these 75% to vote in the next general elections. How do we do that? There has to be civic education. And how does civic education come by? The government has to take leadership as far as that is concerned.
Yes, Boka, you had a point.
First of all, I want to respond to a few things that my sister here has actually raised. You don't start a fraud process and then you try to cry out of time. The Constitution of Kenya mandates the Kenyan government to collect the views from below, not from above. Now, if you start a fraud process, then you say, come on, let me continue with my fraud because time is bad. First of all, there will be no crisis whatsoever if this finance bill is rejected in totality. In fact, the other finance bill, they just remove the housing levy and continue with it because it is already too punitive. So there will not be a constitutional crisis, my sister. The second thing, she is lying. There is no way that the President Ruto is running a policy of localization of programs. In terms of actually employment of the youth people, the president has a deliberate policy to export people as slaves to work abroad. The president is doing nothing to create employment at home. So there is no such a localization process that the president is actually funding cooperative movements or funding processes that will lead to industrialization in this country. In fact, if you look at his most conceived employment tactics, even within the EPZ, what is actually saying is turning Kenyans into a modern day slavery, because he's suspending in the EPZs, in the what is calling economic special zone, is suspending all labor rights. He's giving the people, the so-called investors from outside, tax holidays for 10 years. They are giving them subsidized water and electricity. These are the people that are making money at the back of the poor Kenyans. So anybody trying to lie to the Kenyans that President Ruto is running a localization program to actually protect the interest of the youth, are they not the same youth that he was saying wachukue hustler fund waanze kuuza njugu hapa kwa barabara? These are neoliberal free enterprising that has been experimented in these countries. It was really unfortunate that even my sister says that there is nothing we can do about IMF. There is nothing we can do against the foreign intervention in our domestic affairs. There is something we can do by rejecting that IMF and World Bank are the same Bretton Woods institutions that killed employment in 1990s. That is where there was golden handshake to unemploy the majority of the Kenyan people through what at that time was called structural adjustment plans. These SAPs turned the Kenya in what it is today, a neo-colonial system that now Kenya, we brags for only one thing. Everything in Kenya, Ayub, ni mtumba, second hand, even our ideas, even our clothes, the textile industries was all killed by the neoliberal policies of the World Bank. So anybody that do not want to reject intervention, that is why we continue to say even in the streets that we do not want IMF, we do not want World Bank, we do not want Ruto because he is an imperialist puppet. He goes to the G7, he goes to visit Washington and come back to us only with what? Lip service. So what we want to push is that first thing, the reality is that Kenya is not producing anything. So when we are not producing anything, then we are consuming more than we are producing. So if you tell us, the president, that the taxation, you are going to tax the production of this country, you are not providing an alternative. In fact, President Ruto is creating a vehicle for his rich criminals around him to actually make billions of money against the back of the poor people. The second thing that it's a reality is that we cannot say that we were born in a system where the people who colonize us controls how our programs, so we have no issue to debate about it. The people, it took the young people to go to the street for anything you're commenting about in this show, about victory of the young people, whether it is constitutional, overthrow of dictator Moi, the open of democratic space, people came out to the streets and dramatized the failure of our institution. For now, what we are requesting President Ruto, to copy what the East did after colonization. You have mentioned Singapore. I always mention China. I always mention Vietnam. I mention Laos. The thing is, after independence, there are countries that chose to have internal looking policies that said that for a fact we cannot rely on the people who brutalized our country for many years to actually generate income. So you remember that, for example, the Communist Party of China under leadership Mao said we have to start producing. And the most thing we must produce first before we move is food. We cannot produce food when land is in the hands of billionaire brokers. We cannot produce food when politicians, criminals are holding land to take. So we want President William Samoei Ruto to address the land question, which is at the center of the struggle. The second is the employment with dignity.
Okay.
Let him not export us as slaves. Let us not broker us abroad.
Yes.
That's what we are asking.
Yes, let me give Josephine the right of reply. Yeah.
Yes. So I think what Buka and I are actually saying are the same thing, just different languages. Because, and then of course you had some contradictory statements there. You're saying one thing and saying another. So you talk about local production, but then you say we should not have local production. We should rely.
No,
okay.
I didn't say we don't
anyways,
have local production.
I have the right of reply as Ayub said. So we're saying the same thing. We do not want to depend on the IMF. And that's what I mentioned here. And I underscored that what the Asian Tigers did is make a current sacrifice for a future reward. You know what a current sacrifice is? Is investing in the local, local productions and even the local labor. Because I even mentioned education, investing in the local labor.
Where is Ruto
now
investing
listen.
in the local labor?
Okay,
that is what we're
Yes.
asking. Where is he investing in the local labor?
Listen, to the question of, exporting, our labor force, he is right. We're exporting a lot of our labor force by the hand of trajectory that IMF has. Think of it as we have Deni, IMF, but how IMF is asking for money is not get it from, the budget and give it to us. They want control over our policies. And by that control of our policies, what is it doing? Saying, you know what, in our developing countries, we have weak labor force. People don't want to study for health and nurses. So what do? Let's go to these people, let's tell them to go to our developed countries and be the labor force. We have a problem in Haiti. Let's go to this country that has our Deni. We go take them to Haiti to fight for us. If we want freedom, it actually is. I agree with you. That's why I'm saying we're speaking the same language. I agree with you.
You're not speaking the same.
Because if we have to have freedom of the IMF, is what I underscored as make current sacrifice for a future gain. We are looking at Vision 2030, Ayub. I will be in my 30s by Vision 2030. I will be the most burdened. But here's the thing. How do you make a current sacrifice? By, if we localize a lot of products, some of the products people are saying they're not good for us. If a lot of the imports, we start exercising duty on them. A lot of those products we use, especially edible oil, is the second most imported good in the country after fuel, and it's a very consumed product. If we hike that and decide we depend on our local products, it will have to have a shift in our culture, in our consumer behavior, a lot of these things. But we're already living in tough economic times. Are we ready? This is a question to the people, not to the government. Are we ready to make this current sacrifice, or do we scrap off the finance bill in totality, make taxes friendly, but then Vision 2030 is compromised because we'll keep on relying on the hand of IMF.
Okay, and why not then address the pilferage? Pilferage in terms of corruption and the money that is stolen.
And they addressed that. Let me go to June 15th, the Daily Nation on June 14th or 15th. Here, this is the statement of the CS of Treasury, who talked about, and in the news, it was IMF's hidden hand in proposal to suspend hiring, cut spending. And then he said this, on what is called now tax leakages and where it goes, especially because you mentioned the report of the Auditor General, which I acknowledge, which said that we have misappropriation of funds, and he mentioned it in 4 different ways, which I want to go to. If you want to know about the audit, I'm not saying that corruption and misappropriation of funds is not a question. I'm actually saying that Gen Zs are going in the right trajectory in addressing misappropriation of funds. But listen to your question on pilferages. So he said, Professor Ndung'u also announced, and I'm quoting the Daily Nation, the suspension of all refurbishments and partitioning of government offices. Government offices and purchase of furniture for 1 year, rationalization of all allocations for purchase of motor vehicles. These are in addition to cuts for the foreign travel, curtailing of training expenses, which will be restricted within the state institutions. Procurement for common user items will be consolidated to achieve our quantity discounts. Other measures include reducing allocations to semi-autonomous government agencies, the SAGAs, by 30%, and requiring the entity to surrender surplus funds to the Treasury, amongst other things. And amongst the things I aforementioned about, transparency on the internet and digitally, on e-procurement services, and what the Kitui government is doing. That is being addressed, and that is the question that our Gen Zs are on the street for. And I commend what he called the woke generation, not just the Gen Zs, the woke generation for what they are doing. It is a process that if we need to release our hand of IMF in us, we need to have absolute transparency, absolutely no corruption, and a focus on the manufacturing industry and education of the country.
Yeah,
that is the question we need to be talking about.
You mentioned that, and the statement by the CS, Professor Njuguna Ndongo. But looking at the Control of Budgets report, in the first 9 months of this financial year, in March, the national government spent extra 4.11 billion on foreign travels. I mean, what's the point of making such statements when the very same austerity measures are not adhered to? And even the Control of Budget further says in her report that had covered the period, the first 9 months, some 2 months ago in March, says that even some of the government agencies that you have mentioned did not provide documents for verification purposes, and the others that did had glaring discrepancies in terms of what they had provided. So clearly, it's a matter of saying it as a policy statement, but in terms of living by that.
Yes.
So there's a problem that Josephine here I'm pointing out.
Yeah.
And then how can it be addressed? Because you look at Parliament where when the COB, the Control of Budget, says that, look, folks, I'm the only officer in my office, then my salary is tripled, and I'm the only officer there. She seeks justification, and she's not given answers. Now, this comes down to the budget-making process. So who needs to address that? It's Parliament.
For sure.
Because Parliament is been given the mandate by the Constitution to look at our budget process as gatekeepers. That A is bad, B is good. That isn't happening. There's no hope in Parliament from the young generation. So when we point out such glaring discrepancies that we agree there is a problem, money is being stolen, then from a Gen Z's perspective, how then do you address it?
Okay. I have not said, and I have actually openly agreed with even Auditor General's report, and I've agreed that there's misappropriation of funds, and I've agreed there's corruption, and even those pilferages or tax leakages, wherever they are going, it is there. We are having steps to reduce, or not to say we, because I'm the Gen Z, the government is trying to have steps to reduce this corruption and increase transparency and accountability. When it comes to the control,
the government are doing.
Let her finish her point. Let her finish her point.
Specific. You know, she talks of localization.
Let her finish her point, Mbuka. Let her finish her submission. Okay. Yes, please proceed.
When you talk about the control of budget receiving all these discrepancies and whatnot, it is the role of the government. And I'm telling you, I started with, I am a Gen Z, I am protesting. The trajectory is not right. And I'm here on Citizen TV to tell Gen Zs and all the protesters, this is the trajectory we should be going. What you have raised is what I would love also to raise to the Gen Z protesters, or the, what you call, woke generation protesters. Tell them, look, this is the problem. The problem isn't even about the budgeting problem, it's the accountability problem. And you have mentioned that clearly. As I've said before, there are already steps, although small. Journey of 1,000 steps starts with one step. Although small, in the Kitui government and in even the national government on procurement services, it is there. Number two, we're talking about whatever the CS Treasury said here is in the 2024-2025 financial year. He's noted all those budgets that were unnecessary in the previous year and has cut them. And even as a part of a person in the insurance industry, I have noted the Reinsurance Parastatal, Kenya Reinsurance Corporation have actually cut all travels and have limited to one person, and that's the managing director, and that is cutting across all parastatals. So it is actually happening. I can see it from where I stand.
Yes.
We need to show and give it time, but still, Gen Zs should not sleep on it. That is the question I'd like to pose to the work generation. Not to come and say, just reject finance bill. We have a bigger problem. That you, Ayub, have mentioned, and that's what I'd like to put out to this generation.
So the woke generation should be awake. Guy.